when the FEB blocked a German army's only escape route, the decision no sergeant should have had to make. From the north, on every road and track, converging toward the single mountain pass at Fornovo di Taro, the Passo della Cisa, the only viable route through the Apennines into Liguria, and the last open corridor between the collapsing German position in northern Italy and whatever the Wehrmacht imagines it can reach on the other side, approximately 14,000 men are moving south. They are the remnants of the German 148th Infantry Division, the Italian Fascist Bresciana Division, and several smaller attached formations, compressed by the Allied spring offensive into a retreating mass that has abandoned its defensive positions, shed its heavy equipment, and is now moving on foot and in whatever vehicles still have fuel, with the specific focused urgency of men who understand that the war is ending and that the question is no longer whether they will fight, but whether they will survive. They need the road at Fornovo. Without it, they are trapped. On the morning of April 28th, a Brazilian sergeant named Haroldo Ferreira da Silva is sitting in the cab of a reconnaissance vehicle approximately 11 kilometers south of Fornovo di Taro, looking at a map he has already memorized, waiting for orders that have not arrived. He has looked at the map enough times to know one thing with complete certainty. If his unit does not reach Fornovo before the Germans do, 14,000 men will escape into the mountains, and the war in Italy will not end today. He folds the map. He makes a decision. He tells his driver to go. To understand what Haroldo Ferreira da Silva is doing on a provincial highway in the Po Valley on the morning of April 28, 1945, it is necessary to understand the specific strategic situation that is produced in the final days of the Italian campaign, the possibility that a Brazilian sergeant in a reconnaissance vehicle could find himself in a position to determine the outcome of an encirclement operation involving tens of thousands of men. The spring offensive that the Allied command in Italy calls Operation Grapeshot begins on April 9, 1945. It is the culminating operation of a campaign that has been grinding northward through the Italian peninsula since September 1943. 19 months of mountain fighting, river crossings, and attritional warfare against a German defensive posture that has made Italy the most costly campaign per kilometer of advance in the Western Allied experience of the Second World War. By April 1945, the strategic context has changed fundamentally. The Wehrmacht in Italy is no longer receiving reinforcements. Its supply lines are interdicted by Allied air power to a degree that has reduced its operational mobility to a fraction of doctrinal capacity. The divisions holding the Gothic Line are at between 40 and 60% of established strength, their equipment worn, their ammunition limited. The German strategic position in Italy is not merely deteriorating, it is collapsing. Operation Grapeshot is designed to accelerate and complete that collapse through a double envelopment. Simultaneous breakthroughs on the eastern and western flanks of the Gothic Line, with converging armored thrusts aimed at cutting off the German forces in the Po Valley before they can withdraw north across the Po River. The FEB, the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, now in its 8th month of combat operations in Italy, is assigned to the Fifth Army's axis of advance through the central Apennines. What the operational planners do not fully anticipate is how completely and how rapidly the German defensive structure will disintegrate once the breakthrough is achieved. The Gothic Line, which has held for 7 months, comes apart in 72 hours. By April 20th, the FEB's lead elements are through the mountains and into the Po Valley. By April 22, they are moving at speeds the Italian campaign has not seen since the fall of Rome. Not grinding mountain warfare, but a pursuit against an enemy that is no longer defending positions, but running for its life. The geography of the problem at Fornovo is straightforward. The Po Valley in this sector has exactly one viable crossing point for a force the size of the German 148th Division and its attached formations. The Passo della Cisa, accessed through the town of Fornovo di Taro, where the Taro River Valley narrows into the mountain pass. Every other route through the mountains is a mule track incapable of supporting 14,000 men in retreat. Fornovo is not one of several options. It is the only option. The unit assigned the blocking mission is the FEB's 1st Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, equipped with M8 Greyhound armored cars, jeeps, and light vehicles, capable of the rapid advance the infantry regiments cannot match. Its mission, assigned on the evening of April 27th, is to advance at maximum speed along the Via Emilia, reach Fornovo ahead of the German columns, and establish a blocking position on the road. The mission is clear. The timeline is not. The German columns are already moving. The distance from the FEB's forward positions to Fornovo is approximately 47 kilometers. The distance from the nearest German column to Fornovo is approximately 31 kilometers. The Germans have a head start, and the orders, when they arrive at the squadron's forward element on the morning of April 28th, are incomplete in one critical respect that will place a sergeant named Haroldo Ferreira da Silva in a position that no manual has prepared him for. The orders specify the blocking mission. They do not specify what to do when the Germans arrive. The FEB's 1st Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron has been in continuous operation since the opening of the spring offensive on April 9, 1945. In the 19 days since the breakthrough began, the squadron has covered more ground than in the preceding 7 months of the Italian campaign combined, daily distances of 40, 60, sometimes 80 kilometers, in a campaign where 3 kilometers per day had been the recent norm. The men are not fresh. They carry the specific exhaustion of units in a pursuit operation, not the grinding attrition of static mountain warfare, but the relentless, sleep-depriving tempo of an advance that does not stop because the enemy does not stop. They are tired in the way that men at the end of a long campaign are tired, competently, functionally, with everything non-essential stripped away. The squadron's commanding officer is Captain Rui Moreira Lima, a 30-year-old cavalry officer from São Paulo who has built, through 8 months of operations, a command culture that his after-action reports reflect in their emphasis on initiative, speed, and the willingness to make decisions ahead of orders when the tactical situation requires it. Lima is not a man who waits for permission when the ground is telling him something the radio has not yet confirmed. This quality transmits downward through the unit. The squadron's junior leaders have learned that the gap between what the orders say and what the situation requires is a space in which initiative is expected, not prohibited. It is this culture, specific, cultivated, the product of 8 months under a particular commander, that makes what happens on April 28th possible. The squadron's lead element on the morning of April 28th is a mixed reconnaissance section of 4 vehicles, 2 M8 Greyhound armored cars, each mounting a 37mm main gun and a 30 caliber coaxial machine gun, and 2 jeeps carrying a total of 8 men, including the section leader and his radio operator. The section leader is Sergeant Haroldo Ferreira da Silva. He is 26 years old, born in Uberaba in the state of Minas Gerais, a city of approximately 60,000 people in the Brazilian Cerrado, the son of a railway worker, educated through the secondary level. He was conscripted in 1942, trained as a cavalry reconnaissance specialist, and has been in Italy since July 1944. He holds the rank of sergeant by the combination of demonstrated competence and attrition that advances enlisted men in a unit that has been in continuous combat for 8 months. His service record contains 2 commendations, both for reconnaissance operations in the Apennines in the autumn and winter of 1944, both emphasizing his ability to assess and report on tactical situations accurately and under pressure. The last communication from headquarters, received at 06:14 hours, confirmed the blocking mission and the route. It did not confirm the rules of engagement. It did not specify what action the section should take if it arrived at Fornovo before the German columns, whether to hold in place, whether to engage German forces that had not yet surrendered in a theater where armistice negotiations were known to be in progress but not yet concluded. These questions are not academic. The armistice between the German forces in Italy and the Allied Command, Operation Sunrise, the secret negotiation proceeding in Switzerland since February 1945, is in its final phase. The German plenipotentiary, SS General Karl Wolff, has been negotiating a conditional surrender that both sides understand is imminent. On April 28th, the surrender has not been signed. The war in Italy is legally, formally still being fought. German forces that have not received surrender orders are still combatants. Brazilian forces that detain soldiers attempting to surrender under a negotiation that has not yet produced a signed document are operating in a legal and tactical gray area the squadron's orders do not address. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva knows about Operation Sunrise, the way frontline soldiers know about high-level negotiations. Imprecisely, through rumor and inference, with enough detail to understand the general shape of the situation, but not enough to know what it means for the specific decision he may have to make in the next 40 minutes. He knows that the war is ending. He does not know exactly when. He knows that 14,000 Germans are moving toward Fornovo. He does not know if they will fight. He knows that his orders say to block the road. He does not know what to do when the road is blocked, and the Germans arrive and there is no signed surrender and no officer within radio range to ask. His driver is watching the road ahead. The poplars are casting their morning shadows across the asphalt. Fornovo di Taro is 11 kilometers north. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva tells his driver to go faster. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva is not a man the Brazilian Army's personnel system flagged for exceptional destiny. His service record is more detailed than most enlisted documentation. The additional training courses, the 2 commendations, the technical qualifications of a cavalry reconnaissance specialist, but it is still the record of a man the system processed according to its categories: conscript, trained, deployed. Promoted by demonstrated competence, the record is accurate. It is not illuminating. It does not contain the specific quality that will matter most on the morning of April 28th, because that quality does not have a box in the personnel system's form. What the record does contain, read carefully, is a pattern. The 2 commendations describe a man who consistently produced accurate assessments of situations that were ambiguous, fast-moving, and consequential. Situations where information was incomplete, time for deliberation was short, and the cost of a wrong assessment was measured in men and operational outcomes. The commendation language emphasizes not conventional courage, but something more specific: the ability to read a situation correctly when the situation is actively resisting being read correctly, and to act on that reading with sufficient speed that the tactical opportunity does not close before it can be exploited. This is a cognitive skill that military organizations value enormously and struggle to develop systematically because it cannot be taught the way weapons handling or radio procedure can be taught. It can be cultivated, partially, by the kind of command culture Captain Lima has built. But it is ultimately a quality a man brings to the situation, or does not. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva brings it from Uberaba. The specific practical intelligence of a man who has grown up in a context where problems are solved with available resources rather than ideal ones, where the gap between what the situation requires and what the system provides is a normal condition rather than an exceptional one, and where the person who bridges that gap is the person who has accurately assessed what the gap actually is, not larger than it is, which produces paralysis, and not smaller than it is, which produces disaster. His radio operator, Corporal Dirceu Almeida, will describe in a 1978 interview the quality he observed on the morning of April 28th in terms that point at the same thing. He was not a man who panicked, and he was not a man who pretended. When he did not know something, he said so. When he knew something, he acted on it. On that morning, he knew where the road was, and he knew where the Germans were, and he knew what would happen if we did not get there first. The rest he did not know. But the rest was not what mattered yet. He has answered the tractable question. He is moving north at 55 kilometers per hour, and the road ahead is straight and flat and empty, which means the German columns have not yet reached this point from the north. The margin is measured in minutes, not hours, and Fornovo di Taro sits at the point where the Taro River Valley narrows from the broad Po Plain into the mountain gorge, the road at that point passing between the river on the west and a steep hillside on the east, compressed into a defile approximately 80 meters wide. A blocking position established at that defile, even 4 vehicles, even 8 men, cannot be bypassed by a force moving in column on a road. The terrain prevents it. The river prevents it. 4 vehicles in the right position at Fornovo are not a speed bump. They are a door. The door is open. He is 11 kilometers away. He tells his driver to go faster. To understand the full dimensions of what Aroldo Ferreira da Silva is racing toward, it is necessary to understand both the force moving toward Fornovo from the north and the specific tactical and legal conditions that make his situation unlike any scenario in the Brazilian Army's training manuals. The force converging on Fornovo is not a single coherent unit executing a planned withdrawal. It is a compression, the accumulated remnants of multiple formations pushed south and west by the Allied offensive, losing cohesion, shedding equipment, merging into a mass that retains military organization at the small unit level, but has lost the command and control structures that would allow it to function as a coordinated force. At its core is the German 148th Infantry Division, the same formation that mined the approach to Gallicano in December 1944, now reduced by 4 months of attrition and the catastrophic losses of the April breakthrough. Around it are elements of the Italian fascist Bresciana Division and several German corps-level support units. Of the approximately 14,000 men, roughly 3,500 are in formed units with functioning chains of command. The remaining 10,500 are in various states of organizational dissolution, moving in the general direction of the pass because it is the only direction that makes sense, responding to the situation according to individual judgment and the informal social dynamics of frightened men in a collapsing military context. A force of 14,000 organized soldiers confronting 4 vehicles would have predictable options. What is moving toward Fornovo is something more complex and more dangerous than doctrine has a category for. The legal situation compounds the tactical one. The laws of war are unambiguous on the status of combatants who have not formally surrendered. They are enemy soldiers and engaging them is lawful. They are also unambiguous on soldiers attempting to surrender. They must be accepted and treated as prisoners of war. What no legal framework addresses with useful specificity is the status of soldiers moving toward a blocking position in the context of ongoing armistice negotiations, who have not formally surrendered but whose senior commanders are in the process of negotiating one. This is the situation Aroldo Ferreira da Silva's orders do not cover. The M8 Greyhound armored car, the primary vehicle of the FEB's cavalry reconnaissance units, weighs approximately 7,900 kilograms, with a maximum road speed of 90 kilometers per hour and armament of one 37mm M6 cannon and one 30 caliber M1919 coaxial machine gun, plus one 50 caliber M2 heavy machine gun on a ring mount. Its armor is 3 to 19 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel, sufficient to stop small arms fire, insufficient to stop any crew-served anti-tank weapon. 2 M8s and 2 Jeeps at a road defile can stop a column. They cannot stop a determined assault by even a fraction of 14,000 men. The blocking position's credibility depends entirely on what the arriving force believes it represents, whether they believe the vehicles are the leading edge of a larger Allied force, or whether they accurately assess them as 4 vehicles and 8 men that can be overrun by 100 soldiers willing to accept casualties. Aroldo Ferreira da Silva knows this. He knows that the blocking position holds exactly as long as the force approaching it believes it should hold. The blocking position is not a physical barrier. It is a signal. There is one additional factor he cannot know on April 28th, but that the historical record will later confirm as decisive. Among the 14,000 men moving toward Fornovo, the senior German commander, General-Lieutenant Otto Freder Pico, has already made a private decision. He does not intend to fight through a blocking position. He intends to surrender. He has been moving his force toward Fornovo not because he believes he can escape, but because movement is the only way to maintain the organizational coherence he will need to execute a surrender in an orderly way. Freder Pico's intention is not communicated to the Brazilian blocking position. It exists as a private decision in the mind of a German general who is moving 14,000 men toward a road junction where a Brazilian sergeant is about to park 2 armored cars and wait. Neither man knows what the other intends. The road runs between them, straight and flat, through the spring morning. You are watching the final hours of the Italian campaign. A Brazilian sergeant, 4 vehicles, and 14,000 Germans converging on a single road. The war is ending. The orders have not arrived. What happens next was never supposed to be a sergeant's call. If this kind of history matters to you, subscribe. There are more roads, more decisions, more men who did what the manual said was impossible. The section reaches Fornovo di Taro at 07:43 hours. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva's lead M8 comes into the town from the south on the Via Emilia, passes through the brief commercial center, a pharmacy, a hardware store, a bar with its shutters still closed, and continues north to the point where the road narrows between the Taro River on the left and the hillside on the right. The defile is exactly as the map suggested, approximately 80 meters wide at its narrowest point, with the river running fast and cold on the western side and the hillside rising steeply enough on the eastern side to make cross-country movement by wheeled vehicles impossible. A force moving south on this road must pass through this point. There is no alternative. He stops both M8s in the defile, one behind the other, angled slightly across the road to maximize the visual obstruction they present to a force approaching from the north. He positions the 2 jeeps on the hillside above the road, where their elevation gives the 30 caliber machine guns a field of fire across the full width of the defile and approximately 400 meters north along the road. He places his 8 men at positions that create the impression from the north of a prepared defensive position rather than an improvised stop. Men visible at the M8 turrets, men visible on the hillside, the physical arrangement of the section communicating deliberateness rather than improvisation. This takes 11 minutes. At 07:54 hours, the blocking position is established. At 08:06 hours, Dirchu Almeida raises squadron headquarters on the radio for the first time since 06:14. The communication is brief, the signal degraded by the terrain of the Taro Valley, but sufficient to transmit the section's position and the establishment of the blocking position. The response, received in fragments over approximately 90 seconds of broken transmission, confirms the mission and adds one instruction that Haroldo Ferreira da Silva will later describe in his after-action account as the most unhelpful order he received in his entire military career. Hold position. Await further orders. He acknowledges the transmission. The radio goes silent again. No further orders arrive. At 08:31 hours, the first German vehicles appear on the road north of the blocking position. They are 2 Kübelwagen, the German military utility vehicle, roughly equivalent to the American Jeep, moving south at moderate speed, separated by approximately 50 meters. Behind them, at a distance of approximately 300 meters, the road is filled with men on foot, a column that stretches back approximately 800 meters before the road curves north and disappears behind the hillside. The Kübelwagen stop approximately 150 meters north of the M8s. For approximately 45 seconds, nothing happens. The Kübelwagen sit in the road. The foot column behind them slows and compresses as the men at its front register the stopped vehicles ahead. The M8 turrets are trained north, the 37mm guns elevated slightly, the visual message of the blocking position as clear as Haroldo Ferreira da Silva has been able to make it. Then the passenger door of the lead Kübelwagen opens and a German officer steps out. He is a major, the rank insignia visible at 150 meters to a man with 8 months of reconnaissance experience reading enemy uniforms. He walks forward toward the M8s at a pace that is deliberate rather than cautious. Not the careful movement of a man uncertain of his reception, but the purposeful stride of a man who has decided something and is executing the decision. He stops approximately 30 meters from the lead M8 and calls out in German. Aroldo Ferreira da Silva does not speak German. What his section does include, in the person of Corporal Dirceu Almeida, is a working knowledge of Italian, sufficient in the specific linguistic landscape of northern Italy in 1945, where most educated Germans in Italy have developed functional Italian as a working language to serve as an improvised medium of communication. Almeida calls back in Italian. The German major responds in Italian. The exchange, reconstructed from Almeida's 1978 interview and from the after-action account that Aroldo Ferreira da Silva submits 3 days later, proceeds as follows. The major identifies himself as the operations officer of a formation he does not name. He states that his force is moving south toward the pass and requests passage through the Brazilian position. He does not use the word surrender. He is requesting passage, not offering capitulation. A force requesting passage through a blocking position is not surrendering, and a blocking force that grants passage is simply stepping aside. Aroldo Ferreira da Silva does not step aside. He tells Almeida to communicate the following. Passage is not available. The road is closed. The force will halt in place. The major returns to his Kübelwagen. For 7 minutes, nothing happens. The foot column behind the vehicles has continued to compress as more men arrive from the north. The road behind the Kübelwagen is now packed with soldiers extending back beyond the visible curve, a mass of men that has nowhere to go because the road ahead is blocked and the terrain on both sides prevents dispersion. The men at the column's front are close enough that Aroldo Ferreira da Silva can read, with 8 months of experience reading enemy soldiers, the specific quality of exhaustion and resignation in the way they are standing. They are not preparing to assault. They are waiting to be told what to do next. At 08:47 hours, a second German officer approaches the blocking position on foot. He is a colonel, senior to the major by 2 ranks, and senior to Aroldo Ferreira da Silva by a distance the Brazilian Army's rank structure does not have a category for. He speaks Italian without intermediary, addressing Aroldo Ferreira da Silva directly across the 30 meters of road between them. He says, "The war is over. His force wishes to surrender to the Brazilians. He requests that the Brazilian commander accept the surrender and arrange for the processing of his men." Aroldo Ferreira da Silva is a sergeant. He has no authority to accept the surrender of 14,000 men. He has no orders authorizing him to accept a surrender. He has no communication with his squadron commander, no communication with regimental headquarters, no communication with any officer in his chain of command who could authorize the action the German colonel is requesting. He also has, in front of him, 14,000 men who want to surrender, a blocking position that has held for 47 minutes without firing a shot, and a radio that has been silent since 08:06. He makes the only decision available to a man who has accurately assessed the gap between what the situation requires and what the system provides, and who has spent 8 months learning that the gap must be filled by judgment. He tells Dirceu Almeida to tell the German colonel that the surrender is accepted. He then tells Almeida to keep trying the radio. The problem with accepting the surrender of 14,000 men when you are 8 men is not the acceptance. It is everything that comes after. At 08:51 hours, 4 minutes after Aroldo Ferreira da Silva tells the German colonel that the surrender is accepted, the practical dimensions of what he has just done begin to present themselves. The foot column north of the blocking position begins to receive information, passed back through the column in the informal, rapid way that information moves through infantry formations, that something is being negotiated. The compression at the front of the column eases slightly. But the column does not stop. It continues to arrive from the north, and the mass of men in the defile continues to grow. By 0900 hours, Haroldo Ferreira da Silva's estimate is that between 2,000 and 2,500 men are visible in the immediate area of the blocking position, with the column extending north beyond his line of sight. 8 Brazilian soldiers, 2,000 Germans within visual range. The nearest Brazilian infantry support is approximately 23 kilometers south on the Via Emilia. He does not communicate this ratio to his men in those terms. He does not need to. They can see the road. What he does instead is manage the physical space of the surrender with the specific pragmatism that has characterized every decision he has made since 0530 hours. He directs the German major, who has shifted from requesting passage to functioning as an informal liaison between the German column and the Brazilian section, to begin moving surrendered men off the road and into the fields on the eastern side of the defile, in groups of no more than 200 at a time. He directs one of his jeep crews to reposition to the eastern side to maintain observation of the holding area. He maintains both M8s in the road, turrets north, guns elevated, the physical signal of the blocking position unchanged regardless of the negotiations that have produced the surrender. This management of space, the separation of surrendered men from the road, the maintenance of the blocking position's configuration, the use of the German major as a force multiplier for managing a mass that 8 Brazilians cannot manage by direct supervision, is not from any manual. It is from 8 months of experience reading situations and filling the gap between what the situation requires and what the resources available can provide. At 0914 hours, Dirceu Almeida raises Captain Lima on the radio. The communication lasts 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Lima, moving north on the Via Emilia with the squadron's main body, receives Haroldo Ferreira da Silva's report in the specific sequence that a commander needs to act on it. Position established, blocking mission accomplished, German force in contact, surrender accepted, approximately 14,000 men. Request immediate reinforcement and officer-level presence to formalize the surrender. Lima's response, as Almeida records it in his 1978 interview, is a single sentence before the operational instructions begin. He said, "How many of them are there again? The operational instructions that follow authorize the actions already taken and direct the squadron's main body to Fornovo at maximum speed. The estimated time of arrival is 40 to 50 minutes. 40 to 50 minutes. With 14,000 men in the fields east of the defile and more arriving from the north every minute, the situation must hold on the authority of 2 M8 armored cars, 2 jeeps, and the specific credibility that Haroldo Ferreira da Silva has established in the preceding hour by doing exactly what he said he would do and nothing more. It holds. The German column continues to arrive. The surrendered men continue to move into the fields. The German colonel, whose name Haroldo Ferreira da Silva will later learn, is Oberst Heinrich Vogt, the senior surviving officer of the 148th Division's rear guard, moves between the Brazilian blocking position and the German column with the focused efficiency of a professional soldier executing the most orderly exit available from a situation that has no good outcomes, only less bad ones. He does not challenge the blocking position. He does not attempt to negotiate revised terms. He manages his men into the holding area with a discipline that Haroldo Ferreira da Silva will note in his after-action account as the single most unexpected element of the entire operation. The most disciplined men on the road at Fornovo di Taro on the morning of April 28, 1945, are the men surrendering, not the men accepting the surrender. At 10:03 hours, the first vehicles of Captain Lima's main body appear on the Via Emilia from the south. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva watches them come up the road, the M8s and jeeps of the squadron, the dust of their advance visible before the vehicles themselves, the sound of their engines reaching him across the flat valley floor a full minute before they are visible. He does not move from his position in the defile. He stays in the road between his 2 M8s, until Lima's vehicle pulls up beside him and the captain steps out. Lima looks at the fields east of the defile, The thousands of men sitting or standing in the morning light, the German officers moving among them, the improvised order of a mass surrender being managed by geometry and authority in approximately equal measure. He looks at Aroldo Ferreira da Silva. He says nothing for a moment. Then he says, "Report." Aroldo Ferreira da Silva reports. The formal surrender at Fornovo di Taro is processed over the following 72 hours. Captain Lima assumes command of the blocking position at 10:03 hours on April 28th and immediately begins the coordination with FEB Regimental Headquarters and 5th Army Command that the scale of the surrender requires. The processing of 14,000 prisoners, their disarmament, their documentation, their movement to rear area holding facilities, the logistical challenge of feeding and providing water to a mass of men larger than most of the towns in the immediate area, is a task that exceeds the capacity of a single cavalry reconnaissance squadron and requires the commitment of additional FEB infantry elements, American military police units, and the improvised infrastructure of an army that has planned for a pursuit operation and must now manage a mass capitulation. What it does not require, after 10:03 hours, is Aroldo Ferreira da Silva. His section has accomplished its mission. The road is blocked. The force is contained. The surrender is in the process of being formalized by officers with the authority and the resources that the situation requires. The sergeant from Uberaba, who arrived at Fornovo di Taro at 07:43 hours with 4 vehicles and 8 men and no orders covering what to do next, has been superseded by the institutional weight of the military system he has been operating outside of for the preceding 2 hours and 17 minutes. He moves his section to a position south of the defile and stands down. The formal surrender document, the instrument by which General Lieutenant Otto Freder Pico formally capitulates the remnants of the 148th Infantry Division and attached formations to the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, is signed at 14:30 hours on April 29, 1945, approximately 30 hours after Aroldo Ferreira da Silva parked his M8s in the road. The document is signed by Freder Pico and by the FEB's commanding general, General João Batista Mascarenhas de Moraes. It is witnessed by American Fifth Army officers and noted in the official records of the Italian campaign as one of the largest single-unit surrenders of the final weeks of the war in Europe. The document does not mention Fornovo di Taro by name in its operative clauses. It does not mention the blocking position. It does not mention the 2 M8 armored cars that were parked in a road defile at 07:43 hours on April 28th by a sergeant who had assessed the situation, found his orders insufficient, and made the decision that the situation required. In the Fifth Army's operational summary for April 28, 1945, the Fornovo blocking action is noted in a single sentence. FEB cavalry elements established blocking position at Fornovo di Taro, containing withdrawing German forces. The sentence is accurate. It is complete in the way that operational summaries are complete, recording the outcome without recording the mechanism, noting the result without noting the man. The final count of prisoners processed at Fornovo and in the subsequent days of the surrender operation is 14,779 men, the largest single capture in the FEB's operational history, and one of the largest single-unit surrenders of any Latin American military force in the Second World War. Aroldo Ferreira da Silva is not present for the signing of the surrender document. He is with his section, maintaining the blocking position's southern perimeter, doing the unglamorous work of a military operation's final hours, checking vehicles, maintaining weapons, eating a meal that the operational tempo of the preceding days has made irregular. His hands, Dirceu Almeida will later say, were steady throughout, before the Germans arrived, during the negotiation, after Lima came. Steady throughout. Aroldo Ferreira da Silva returns to Brazil in the summer of 1945. He disembarks at Rio de Janeiro with the rest of the FEB's cavalry elements, walks through the same crowds on Avenida Rio Branco that every returning FEB soldier walks through, and returns to Uberaba by the rail line that his father worked and that he has known since childhood. He resumes civilian life within months of his discharge. Not agricultural work, as for many FEB veterans from rural backgrounds, but the specific urban employment of a man with secondary education and the technical qualifications his military service has added to it. He works in the railway administration that employs his father in a position that his service records documentation of technical training and demonstrated competence has made available to him. He does not speak publicly about Fornovo. This is not unusual among FEB veterans in the years immediately after the war. The speed with which Brazil's public attention moves on from the FEB's Italian campaign, the political displacement of the Vargas government in October 1945, the institutional indifference of the military establishment that sent the FEB to Italy and then declined to systematically preserve or analyze what it learned there, the absence of the veterans' organizations and memorial culture that sustain military memory in the United States and Britain, creates a context in which the men who fought in Italy have no obvious audience for their experience and no institutional framework encouraging them to document it. For Haroldo Ferreira da Silva specifically, there is an additional reason for silence more particular than the general conditions of FEB memory loss. What he did at Fornovo on the morning of April 28 was, by the strict reading of military authority and the laws of war, an action that exceeded his mandate. He accepted the surrender of 14,000 men without authorization. He committed his government, his army, and his chain of command to obligations that a sergeant has no authority to create. That the decision was correct, that it produced an outcome his chain of command immediately ratified, and the historical record confirms as one of the FEB's signal operational achievements, does not change the formal character of what he did. He acted outside his authority. He was right. In military organizations, being right outside your authority is better than being wrong inside it, but it is not the same as being right inside it. And the men who were right outside their authority rarely see their names attached to the outcomes they produced. Captain Lima's after-action report for the Fornovo operation, filed on May 3, 1945, is the most detailed account of the blocking action in any official document. Lima names Haroldo Ferreira da Silva as the section leader and describes the decision to accept the surrender in language that is carefully constructed. Not insubordination, not unauthorized action, but initiative in the execution of the assigned mission, a characterization that is both accurate and protective, preserving the outcome while managing the precedent. Lima recommends Haroldo Ferreira da Silva for a commendation. The commendation is approved at the regimental level. It is the third entry in his service record that uses the word initiative without quite saying what the initiative consisted of. The commendation does not specify Fornovo. It does not specify 14,000 prisoners. It does not specify the 2 hours and 17 minutes between the establishment of the blocking position and the arrival of the squadron's main body, during which a sergeant held a surrender together with 4 vehicles and the specific authority of a man who had assessed the situation correctly and acted without waiting to be told. What it specifies is distinguished service in the execution of the blocking mission at Fornovo di Taro, April 28, 1945. Distinguished service, 3 words for 2 hours and 17 minutes, and 14,779 men. Dirceu Almeida, the corporal who operated the radio and served as interpreter in the negotiation with the German colonel, gives his 1978 interview to a Brazilian Army oral historian conducting research on the FEB's cavalry operations. The interview is the most detailed account of the Fornovo blocking action from the perspective of a participant below officer rank. Almeida describes the advance, the establishment of the position, the German contact, the negotiation, the acceptance of the surrender, and the 49 minutes between that acceptance and the arrival of Captain Lima's main body. He describes Haroldo Ferreira da Silva with a precision the commendation language does not approach. He says, "There are men who become larger when the situation becomes impossible. Not louder, larger. They take up more of the space that the situation needs someone to fill." Haroldo was that kind of man. When the German colonel came to the M8 and said his force wished to surrender, I looked at Haroldo to see what he would do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Tell him yes." That was all. Tell him yes. As if the question of whether a sergeant could accept the surrender of 14,000 soldiers was not a question that the situation had time for. He was right. It did not. The 1978 interview is preserved in the Brazilian Army's historical archive in Rio de Janeiro. It is not, to the knowledge of any researcher who has examined the FEB's operational records in the decades since, the subject of any published historical work in any language. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva dies in Uberaba on March 7, 1991. He is 72 years old. His obituary in the local newspaper, the Lavura e Comércio, notes his name, his age, his survivors, and his years of service with the railway administration. It does not mention Italy. It does not mention Fornovo. It does not mention the morning of April 28, 1945, when he parked 2 armored cars in a road in the northern Apennines and told a German colonel yes, and the war in that part of Italy was, for practical purposes, over. The road at Fornovo di Taro still runs between the river and the hillside. The defile is still approximately 80 meters wide. In spring, when the poplars are coming into their foliage and the Taro is running fast with snowmelt, it looks exactly as it looked on the morning of April 28, 1945. A road through a gap between a river and a hill. Unremarkable, unless you know what was decided there, and by whom, and on what authority. There is a specific kind of decision that military organizations are not designed to produce. They are designed to produce obedience, the reliable, scalable transmission of intent from commanders to subordinates, the compression of complex operational goals into executable orders that can be carried out by men who do not need to understand the full picture to do their part of it correctly. This design works. It has worked for centuries. It is the reason that military organizations can coordinate the actions of thousands of people across space and time in ways that no other human institution can replicate. What it cannot produce, what no organizational design has ever reliably produced, is the decision that Haroldo Ferreira da Silva made at 8:47 hours on April 28, 1945. The decision to act on an accurate assessment of a situation that the orders did not cover, in a direction that the orders did not authorize, at a moment when the cost of waiting for authorization was the loss of everything the mission was designed to achieve. That decision requires something the organization cannot install. It requires a man who has looked at the gap between what the orders say and what the situation requires and has understood, with the specific clarity of someone who has been reading situations correctly for 8 months, that the gap is his to fill. Haroldo Ferreira da Silva filled it with 2 armored cars, a corporal who spoke Italian, and 3 words: "Tell him yes." 14,779 men laid down their weapons on the authority of those 3 words. The war in that sector of Italy ended on the authority of those 3 words. The largest single capture in the history of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force rests, at its foundation, on the decision of a railway worker's son from Uberaba, who was never supposed to be in that position, who had no orders covering that situation, and who looked at a German colonel standing in a road in the northern Apennines and said yes before the question of whether he was allowed to had time to become the question. His name is not in any history book. His commendation does not specify what he did. His obituary does not mention Italy, but 14,179 men went home because of him. Some of them were alive to go home because of him. Because the alternative to a negotiated surrender at a credible blocking position was a fighting withdrawal through a blocking position, and fighting withdrawals through blocking positions produce casualties on both sides, and the casualties that did not happen at Fornovo on the morning of April 28, 1945, did not happen, because a sergeant made a decision that the manual said was not his to make. Subscribe. Share it with someone who has never heard of the FEB, never heard of Fornovo, never heard the name Haroldo Ferreira da Silva. Leave a comment. Say his name. There are more roads in the archive, more gaps, More men who looked at the situation and filled it. We will find them.